Good night, this is Fumi Sleepy Time Stories. Tonight's bedtime story is about to begin.
Once upon a time, there was a woman who had 2 daughters. One was her biological daughter, and the other was an adopted daughter. One day, she took them to the fields to work, cutting grass, feeding the chickens, cows, and sheep, and so on. Halfway, there, a filthy, foul-smelling beggar approached them. In truth, this beggar was the loving God in disguise. He asked, "Which way is it to the village?" The woman covered her nose and replied with disgust, "Find it yourself." Her biological daughter, imitating her mother, also covered her nose and added, "If you're afraid of getting lost, you should have brought a guide." Only the adopted daughter said, "Poor man, I will tell you the way. Come with me." God was angered by the mother and daughter, so he cursed them, turning their skin as dark as the night and their features as terrifying as demons. On the other hand, he was kind to the good-hearted adopted daughter. As they approached the village, he blessed her and said, "You may make 3 wishes, and I will grant them." The adopted daughter thought for a moment and said, "I wish to be as beautiful and pure as the sun." The moment she finished speaking, her skin became flawless and radiant like sunlight. "I also wish for a purse that never empties." God granted her the purse. "For my last wish, I wish to go to heaven after I die." God agreed to her wish and bid her farewell. When the woman and her biological daughter returned home, they found themselves as dark as coal and as hideous as demons. In contrast, the adopted daughter had become beautiful and fair-skinned. Jealousy and malice filled their hearts, and they became determined to make her suffer misfortune. However, the adopted daughter had a brother named Regina. They had a close bond and often shared their daily lives with each other. Naturally, she told him everything that had happened when she met the beggar. One day, Regina said to her, "Dear sister, I want to paint your portrait so that when I miss you, I can ease my sorrow. I love you so much that I wish I could see your face at every moment." The adopted daughter agreed, but told her brother, "I hope you won't let anyone else see my portrait." After painting his sister's portrait, he hung it in his room. Regina was the king's coachman. At that time the queen had passed away, and the king was grieving deeply. Ever since the portrait was hung, Regina would stand before it every day. The king's attendants, jealous of the coachman, reported everything to the king. Curious about such an enchanting portrait, the king ordered it to be brought before him. When he saw the portrait, he was shocked. It looked exactly like his late queen. However, if there was any difference, it was that the girl in the painting was even more beautiful. The king fell in love with her at first sight. He immediately summoned the coachman and asked whose portrait it was. When Regina said it was his sister, the king was overjoyed and decided to marry her. He ordered Regina to prepare a carriage and luxurious garments, then sent him to fetch his sister. Regina returned home with his mission. His sister was naturally delighted, but when the dark and ugly daughter heard the news, jealousy consumed her. She said to her mother, "What use is your cunning if you can't fulfill my wish?" The woman was furious. "Don't worry, I will make sure the king marries you instead." She cast a spell to make Regina faint and weaken his eyesight so that he could barely distinguish objects. She also blocked the adopted daughter's hearing, so she could hardly hear anything. Then they boarded the carriage. The adopted daughter wore a luxurious gown, while the mother and her biological daughter secretly followed. Regina sat at the front, driving the carriage. As they traveled, Regina called out, "Cover up, my dear sister. Don't let the rain soak you. Don't let the wind tangle your hair. Stay beautiful for the king to see." The adopted daughter, barely hearing his voice, asked, "What did my dear brother say?" The stepmother quickly answered, "Oh, he said you must take off your golden gown and give it to your sister." Trusting her, the adopted daughter removed her gown and gave it to the dark and ugly sister, while the stepmother handed her an old, tattered dress. They continued on their way. After a while, Regina called out again, "Cover up, my dear sister. Don't let the rain soak you. Don't let the wind tangle your hair. Stay beautiful for the king to see." The adopted daughter asked again, "What did my dear brother say?" The stepmother replied, "Oh, he said you must take off your golden hat and give it to your sister." Without hesitation, the adopted daughter removed her golden hat and gave it to the dark and ugly sister, leaving her own head bare. They continued their journey. Later, Regina called out once more, "Cover up, my dear sister. Don't let the rain soak you. Don't let the wind tangle your hair. Stay beautiful for the king to see." The adopted daughter asked, "What did my dear brother say?" The stepmother replied, "Oh, he said you should look out the carriage window." At that moment, they were crossing a bridge over a deep river. As soon as the adopted daughter leaned out, they pushed her out, sending her into the water. As she sank, a snow-white duck emerged from the river and swam away. Regina, unaware of what had happened, kept driving until they reached the palace. Due to his weakened vision, he mistook the dark and ugly sister for his real sister, identifying her by the shining hat and gown. When the king saw the person who stepped out of the carriage, ugly and dark, nothing like the portrait, he was furious, thinking he had been deceived. He ordered the coachman to be thrown into a pit full of venomous snakes. However, the woman used magic to bewitch the king, making him believe that the dark and ugly girl was not as bad as he initially thought. Incredibly, he even married her. One night, as the black bride sat in the king's embrace, a white duck swam into the kitchen through the drain. It spoke to the cook. "Light the fire. Let me warm myself." The cook obeyed and lit the fire. The duck sat by the fire, shaking off water and preening its feathers. Then it asked, "What is my brother Regina doing?" The cook replied, "He is trapped in the snake pit." "And what is the black bride doing?" The cook answered, "She is sitting in the king's embrace, keeping warm." The duck sighed, "Merciful God, have pity on me." Then it swam away. The second night, the duck returned and asked the same questions. The third night, it did so again. The cook finally reported this to the king. The king, upon hearing the story, became very curious and wished to see the talking duck with his own eyes. That night, he hid in the kitchen, waiting. As soon as the duck appeared, he drew his knife and swiftly cut off its neck. In that instant, the duck vanished, and in its place stood a beautiful young woman, identical to the one in the painting. Overjoyed, the king immediately ordered luxurious garments for her. The foster daughter then recounted how she had been deceived, had her ears blocked, and was ultimately pushed into the water. She pleaded with the king to release her brother, and he agreed without hesitation. Then, the king entered the black bride's chamber and revealed everything about the white bride's suffering. He asked how such a wicked person should be punished. Thinking she would never be exposed, the black bride replied, "She should be stripped of her clothes, placed inside a barrel lined with spikes, and dragged through the land by a horse, the king, hearing this, immediately carried out the punishment on the black bride and her mother. At last, the king married the beautiful white bride and rewarded her loyal brother, making him a nobleman of great wealth.